I'm gonna need you to listen to what I'm about to say very closely. To catch everyone up to speed on New Year's Day, Square-Enix's CEO released a letter talking about how 2022 would be the year of gaming NFTs and quote-unquote play to earn. So I asked you all if you wanted me to talk about it, and overwhelmingly you all voted yes. So here we are. Let's go ahead and dive into it. So like I opened this video, I'm going to ask you guys all to listen to me and what I'm about to say very closely. Play to earn fundamentally changes gaming and its perceived purpose, but make no mistake, this has been something that's actually been with us ever since Twitch and content creation came into full force, even if Twitch and streaming isn't labeled as such. Also, NFTs aren't art. I've seen a lot of people equate to what is going on currently with this speculative market around NFTs in its current state, but I want to dive into what an NFT is and what it's capable of here in a little bit later in this video. But at its core, NFTs represent artificial digital scarcity, and that artificial part is what concerns me as a gamer, and there's a lot of concerns I have, but this isn't going to be a video in which that I am just fear-mongering. This isn't a video where I'm going to only present one side. In fact, I want to talk about three things specifically as it relates to Square Enix and NFTs. First and foremost, we're going to define what an NFT is and what it is actually capable of. Then we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XIV specifically and implications that an NFT would have in that ecosystem. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the real concern that I have with NFTs in gaming in the long run. Now, just because I have concerns doesn't necessarily mean there aren't benefits. And as such, guys, if you actually enjoyed this video, I would love some nice comments. I'd love a nice word. Typically, when I jump into any conversation, especially around gaming and MTX, I get a lot of hate for it because I refuse to take one side, because there is value in microtransactions. And I know I pissed off a bunch of you guys out there. I always believe that it comes down to trust and how it is implemented. That is where the conversation has to live, because microtransactions aren't going to just disappear. And we're on a verge of a whole evolution of MTX with NFT. And I know these are a lot of acronyms, a lot of letters that I'm throwing out early in this video, but more than anything else, I would love a nice comment, because typically I get a lot of hate when I basically take the side of we shouldn't just boycott all games that have microtransactions, because that would only actually make them more money. Because that's what I see. I see boycotts as only benefiting the game in the long run, and science and history proves me right. Look at any Call of Duty. Anyway, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but it's important that we have this conversation. And as such, let's go ahead and dive in. So first and foremost, what is an NFT? All right, so let's dive into it. What is an NFT? Like I said, it represents artificial digital scarcity, but there's actually a lot of technology that goes into it and a lot of implications, especially as it relates to the sale and the resale of digital goods. So let's go ahead and explore just a possibility here, kind of a hypothetical. It will give you some heartburn. It will make you concerned about the potential, but I want to educate you on what it is versus what it is right now. Now, with an NFT, there's a concept called a kickback. There's the built into that the original poster, in this case Square Enix, could actually receive additional money off of a resale. So if something ends up going up in value, they could end up getting money for it. Right now, you cannot sell digital goods. You go and you buy a mount off the Square Enix's cash shop, and that's the end of that transaction. However, if they decided they only want to release, like, say, 500 cruise chasers as something that did cause a lot of drama within the community itself, those items could then be resold if they were NFTs. And with that concept of NFTs, if that resale actually goes up in value because somebody wants to go ahead and pay more for that mount, Square Enix could continue to receive a kickback from those resales. And so there's a lot of speculative going on in the current market that the value is going to go up. And that's not always the case. In fact, I guess the best way to talk about it is a fool and their money are easily parted. And the same thing could be applied to MTX and microtransactions within video games. But at its core, and microtransaction, all of this is really, especially when it relates to gaming, it's about a relationship of trust. I've seen a lot of people happily support cash shop items within Final Fantasy XIV because the game is good and they want the game to continue to go about it, right? And so that is one aspect that you see gamers take. This is another aspect where that support can end up having an asset that you own that you could then resell. And if it goes up in value, then you could benefit. So that's actually going to be a cause for concern. We'll talk about that in part 3. Now, what's the token of this aspect? Well, it's just a publicly kept record. Now, when it comes down to what NFT actually means, non-fungible token, that's where we get into objects or, economics of what is fungible and non-fungible. What do those mean? Fungible means that there's really no scarcity, like a can of Coke. That's a good example that Devin Nash used. If you guys want to go jump in his video, he's very positive on NFTs. And so that's one side of it. But the non-fungible side of it is that something that is rare, something that is limited. And so when it comes down to the concept of, let's say they only release 500 cruise chasers, that would be something that would be non-fungible because there is not a unlimited supply. Why this sits bad with gamers is because it's just a digital record. It's just a token. It's just a line of code that says you have something or you don't. And so that essentially will be something of concern when it comes into gaming in and of itself. But just to understand that the fact that you could have that kickback built into it, you could see that reselling of digital goods actually becoming its own market and its own economy. And one of the things around economies is that as they get established, you'll see systems built around them. So being able to change them later actually requires a lot more effort. Right now, it's a very fluid thing. So you're going to see a lot of game developers try out a lot of different things. Some things aren't going to work. Some things will actually take. And what you'll end up seeing is, especially as game developers kind of jump into it, Ubisoft, EA, Activision, note there's going to be a lot of drama. There's going to be a lot of anger because they're just going to put up things against the wall and see if people are interested in it. And at the end of the day, the sad and unfortunate news is this is going to take. This is definitely going to be something that actually works because there's going to be enough people that are going to drive and dive into that. And once that gets set, especially when they have their investments, they're going to want to defend it. So you're going to see so many content creators and so many people coming out of the woodworks promoting this as a positive once it gets set up, because they're going to end up having an incentive to do so. And that is something to be concerned about as well. Now, another aspect that I haven't actually seen talked about in this relationship is that when it comes to an NFT within Square-Enix, especially as more and more games adopt this, one of the things that will be interesting to see is that if you look at the WoW token, for example, and how that's had an impact, negative and in some ways positive, we got to acknowledge both sides of it. Not all positive, not all negative, but overall, especially with the state of WoW, definitely leaves a bad taste in a lot of gamers' mouth. Imagine if that token, that NFT, their game time token, ended up being accessible and usable in Square-Enix games or in, Nintendo games and things like that. So all of a sudden, as this evolves, you can actually start to see like not just one economy working within one game, is that there could be essentially a way that you could play one game, earn enough of that currency, turn that into Ethereum and transfer that over into another game. And so within a digital goods marketplace, that actually ends up establishing a whole new economy within gaming culture. So this is something that I foresee happening probably within the next 10 years as it relates to this concept, and the fact that Square-Enix themselves are willing to adopt it. I'm expecting that we're going to see more and more game publishers and more start testing this out and trying to find out what ultimately works the best. Now, we talked about it in relation to microtransactions. This could be the evolution of the microtransaction, in which that the microtransaction ends up becoming a limited resource and thus then becomes NFTs, as opposed to an unlimited resource where you just pay your $5 or $10. And so welcome to a new frontier. All right, so now we get into part 2, Final Fantasy XIV and its relationship with NFTs. Make no mistake, I don't think that we're going to see Final Fantasy XIV adopt an NFT model in the near future, but at some point, this is going to, the more time that's applied from this time of this video's publishing to the time that, they want to try different things out, it is very possible. And here's why. A lot of people speak about Final Fantasy XIV very positive and how it's got really good monetization policies and practices. But if I actually just told you about Square Enix's and Final Fantasy XIV's monetization system without telling you that it was related to Final Fantasy XIV, you probably would avoid the game. So Final Fantasy XIV has, you buy the game, you buy the expansions, you pay for a subscription, you have a cash shop for the various items and goods. You also have the ability to hire and pay for more recurring monthly storage space. So you can't just pay money and have more storage. You have to pay money every month for more storage and more market dominance. You have also the ability within the mobile app to subscribe for even more market dominance and even more storage as well. At its core, Square Enix has a great monetization system in terms of its subscription-based game, but it's a game that also has physical items. And you could actually equate a physical item, like I've got here on my shelf here, as an NFT, a limited run limited number of items, and especially like the encyclopedias, like they're putting out more into the world, but they are limited in their supply. And that's why an NFT with that digital artificial, or that artificial digital scarcity, is essentially that aspect, but in a digital frontier. They could always send you unlimited copies of the PDF, but that would lower the value of the physical book, right? So you see how these economies and these frictions kind of apply to each other in that regards. But how would it work in Final Fantasy XIV, or how could it work? The should it would be that if they were to add something like this nature, that's when we have to get into a conversation of them dropping some other thing. Because if they're going to sit here and say, hey, I could buy 500 cruise chasers, or buy cruise chasers and then resell, and all of a sudden I'm playing to earn within Final Fantasy XIV, the concept of the subscription has to go away. And in fact, that could be a fundamental shift in how MMORPGs are monetized. And that's one of the things where MMOs have really struggled in terms of mainstream, even though I do see a resurgence in 2022 of the MMORPG, largely led by Amazon and Square-Enix at this point. But beyond that, like you could see, if they decided to go in this route, you have to start to sit here and say, well, what am I subscribed for? What is that value for? And so I would say that if Square-Enix decided to go this route with Final Fantasy XIV, it would either more or less probably be a different online game, as opposed to them risking the Final Fantasy brand. Because, don't get me wrong, I love Square-Enix, but they are also king of gacha games. They are also king of all these types of monetization systems, but they make good games. And so good game armor comes into play when it comes to talking about this. But at its core, when you look at their, cash shop, for example, I could see them as a game dropping the subscription model and going with maybe a token model, in which that you play to earn game time, you play to earn various mounts, and you have those mounts, and then you can choose to resell those mounts. And that could be a big driving factor for an MMORPG. Again, Final Fantasy XIV is a duck that I would say I would be really shocked if they did this anytime soon. But when you start talking about the longevity of a game, especially one like Final Fantasy XIV, especially after having Endwalker completed, it opens up the game and the world to a whole new potential for what they could release. And I'm not saying what they should do. Personally speaking, I would love for them just to stick with the subscription model, but I know plenty of gamers who would love to go and play Final Fantasy XIV who serve in the military, and it financially doesn't make sense, right? So there is a gray space in which is like, what is the right model for these video games? And if NFTs end up being successful financially, that's where I see things going in, trickling in, because if Square Enix can actually fund the game, specifically off of things, I don't see why they wouldn't. Because if they can drop that subscription fee and get more players in and get more players playing to earn, that's where you would see the shift. Now, I know there's a lot of people who would say they would quit Final Fantasy XIV, and that kind of shifts me into kind of the third topic, which I'm probably going to lose a lot of you. I'm not talking to you specifically. So like you who are watching this video and listening to these words right now, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about gamers in general. And so I think part 3 here is about the fundamental shift in gaming, especially as it relates to content creation. At the start of this video, I said that content creation streaming is really the first phase of play to earn. And what an NFT would do with play to earn doesn't mean that you have to be live streaming to be able to make money off of playing video games. Let's not deny it. Let's not sit here and say that it doesn't happen. Like you look at, Ninja is a great example with this 30 million Mixer deal. Like there is big money to be had in that space. Asmongold, another example, like making a lot of money per month by doing this. In a way, they're playing video games and earning money. While it might not necessarily be understood to be that very thing, it is something that exists. And honestly, all of this conversation would have me tell you, if you're not already doing it, this might be like a call to action to do this, especially if this ends up being successful. Not the NFT side, but I think content creators are going to have a massive leg up in terms of NFTs, because they're going to have more time to play and grind for these things that have potential value or, speculative value. And thus they'll end up being the ones who are kind of a core owner as a part of that, and thus end up being the ones who dictate the direction that it goes. As much as it pains me to kind of understand that fact, it is a part of the fact that, content creators are some of the largest and loudest voices when it comes to these things. And even if they're decrying it right now, at some point, I do see a shift coming in the future. What I also see as a concern, like I said, is that as these systems get set in place, systems around those get set in place, and thus you end up having a lot of friction to that change. The final thing, and this is where I think people are going to be upset if they feel like I'm talking to them specifically. I think gamers are all talk and not really about action. And that's why I think calls to boycotts. And I think that's why gamers ranting on Twitter or in forums don't equate to the reality of what ends up happening. And so I don't put a lot of value in a gamer's rant on a forum, on Reddit, on Twitter, or even yelling at me in the comments, because I don't think they're going to actually do anything. And maybe that individual will, but ultimately every call for boycotts, every call for like we shouldn't support this, only it endears it, and I don't know why, but it just ends up bolstering sales. Like, and the fact is, like, you look at any game that's been released that's had these kind of like drama things, I think that there's all kinds of things that just ends up promoting it to people who are just like, I'm just here to game. And that's the biggest change of all, going from playing to have fun to playing to earn, to where like I decry FOMO. And this is a sense of FOMO that would drive you to be like, well, I gotta go grind. I gotta keep that grind up. And I think with what I'm seeing a lot within society is just general fatigue in terms of that grind. Always gotta be hustling, always gotta be working, always gotta, because your next big break could just be right around the corner. And if you're not working, you're not, that in and of itself, I see as a big danger. This is kind of a bummer of a video, because I'm not necessarily completely against it, because there's the reality that I can't stop it. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. And then there's the reality that if this is going to fundamentally change microtransactions. There could be good things in that. You could go and decide like, hey, I really like this game. I want to support this game. Therefore, I'm going to go ahead and purchase that mount. And then at some point, maybe that mount goes up in price because there's only so many of them. And you are like, well, you know what? I really don't use that mount. I could go ahead and, pay my rent this month with that because someone's willing to pay that. And still the publisher gets money off of that. I see a lot of people decrying this as a kind of a push of greed for these companies. And honestly, at the end of the day, when I see that kind of mindset, it just kind of, I don't relate to it, because it just makes me think that the people who are like, oh, they're greedy and they're just wanting more and more money. Like, that's what a business is. Like, I think a lot of people end up putting these publishers like Square-Enix as like their friends. And even I see this happening with content creation, like, oh, he's my friend, or Square-Enix is my friend, or Yoshi P is my friend. Like, we can definitely like Yoshi P, and we can definitely want to support, the games, and we want him to make good games. And I think at its core, like, NFTs could be successful if the games themselves are good, because players will be more than willing to support that kind of system. But as those systems get set in place, you actually see kind of a greater digital economy growing out of it. And just like with the WoW token, there's definitely some good there, there's some bad there. But you're locked into kind of a Blizzard ecosystem. If that ends up shifting into where you're kind of free to kind of play the games that you enjoy, to actually make something of value within those games, and then to translate that into something that provides for yourself. I think that's why content creators are going to benefit greatly from this kind of platform. I think that's why you'll end up seeing a lot of people experimenting with different things, and there's going to be a lot of drama tied into it. And at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's going to resist it. You might, I might, but gaming in general, I think people are just going to continue to kind of just do the thing. Could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. But I don't think, I just don't see it. I'm just going off the pattern of gaming so far. Maybe this is the moment where gamers say, that's it, I'm truly out. And I think anybody who's saying that they'll quit, like, honestly, I'll be interested to see if they follow through or if they end up making an excuse. And at the end of the day, I mean, Destiny in and of itself proves it. Like, multiple games, you could list any of these games that have all this drama tied around however they do their business, and they're still doing great. So hopefully you guys don't hate me for my takes, but that's my thoughts. Thank you guys for letting me know and wanting me to talk about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if I need to clarify anything in the comments. Hopefully I can make sure that you guys have like the real understanding of what I'm seeing here. I'm not, I don't like microtransactions. I don't necessarily think NFTs are going to be the savior of gaming. I think essentially it's just going to continue on what it is. And I think there's going to be people who are frustrated. And at the end of the day, I think they're still going to find something to play. But time will tell. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, listening, and being here. Love you faces. Hopefully you have a better day. And hopefully this is going to be a fun year for gaming and not a year in which that we all have to get second jobs within games to play them. All right. Bye, guys.
I just want to say I'm really glad you're feeling better, and I love the videos. Well, I love you too. Michelle? Shoot for the moon, and so even if you fail, you'll reach the stars. Go for the 100K subscribers. Yeah.